Hello, this is Richard Teather for the Free Market Roadshow. Sorry that I can't be with you in person at the moment, but hopefully this recording will be of interest. Are we stopping living in order to stay alive? Have government shutdowns and the restrictions and curfews and so on meant that in order to protect people from the virus, in order to reduce deaths, have we actually damaged people's lives? Have we stopped living life fully? I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm an economist, but I don't know whether governments are going the right way in terms of solving the health problems. What I do know is that governments are not even asking the right questions about how should we respond to this health crisis. Yes, it's a health crisis. Yes, there are roles for doctors and for scientists in there. But what we've seen is that scientists, the epidemiologists, have got a very narrow focus. They're trying to reduce the spread of the virus, stop the number of people catching it, reduce the number of cases. But they're not looking at the wider effects of what they're doing. We've had little or no impact from not just economists, not just practical people, but even other health issues. We've not had any mental health input into the effects of lockdowns and so on. We've just been focused on one single thing. We've been trying to keep people alive and ignoring all the other effects of that. And that's potentially causing huge problems. The first question is, are we even saving lives overall? It's quite possible that we're not. We've seen a reduction in people seeking health care for other problems, a massive reduction in cancer treatments, a massive reduction in people with heart problems going into hospitals. This is not because fewer people are getting cancer or fewer people are having heart problems, but because they're not seeking health or not getting health care for that. Partly because, yes, the hospitals and doctors have been busy with other things, they've been focusing on other things, but partly because of the government restrictions, the lockdowns, the government's telling us not to go out and do different things. And that's scared people. There've been a big reduction in people going to hospitals seeking health for things like that. But it's also much wider than that. We've seen a lot of other problems as well. There's a lot of mental health problems building up, a lot of problems. So because of the lockdown, because people aren't getting out as much, there's been a huge increase in loneliness. Governments are putting in curfews, they're telling people to stay at home, not to visit people, not to meet up with friends, not to do what until a year ago we'd see as normal social interactions, part of normal life. We've also had families cooped up together and an increase, sadly, in domestic violence, in family breakdown, in probably in divorces once this is all over and people can separate. A lot of problems from that. And also, because of the lockdowns, because of the restrictions on the economy, because businesses have been closing, we've seen a lot of unemployment. All of those three things, loneliness, family breakdown, unemployment, we know have big effects on people's health and big effects on people's lives. There's in some studies 20 or 30% increase in premature deaths from each of those things, from the loneliness, from unemployment, from mental health problems, from family breakdown. It's quite possible that the effects of those and the lack of treatment are actually going to mean that the lockdowns have caused more health problems than they've saved, that they could actually cause more deaths, or at least more loss of life in terms of life years, than the reductions than they've saved. There's a famous saying by Thomas Sowell, the economist, that there are no answers in economics, there are only trade-offs. So there's no absolute answers, there's no this is the best thing to do. There's always, whatever you do, yes, it causes benefits, but it also causes problems. You know, the Google thing of first do no harm means that we can't actually do anything. Anything that we do causes advantages but also causes harm. And that's true also of lockdowns and all the restrictions that we're putting in. Yes, it can save lives at one level, but it can also cost lives at others and also reduce reduce people's lives, restrict people's lives so much that it gets to the point that, have we really lived over the last year? All the normal things that we think of doing, meeting up with friends, socialising, school, college, education, meeting people, forming relationships, all of these things have been restricted so much that we've basically lost a year out of our lives. Now, for some people, that's not so important. For the old middle-aged family people like me, yes, it's been a nuisance, but it's not been a huge problem. For younger people, it's been a much more of a problem because they've missed out on so much, so many opportunities. All that, those new friendships that you should form, the things that you should be learning and discovering and finding out about life in the early years have been so restricted. And the problem with this is that it's been government action, government mandates as to what we do about this, rather than a few countries, yes, have allowed much more freedom. Sweden, some of the US states have allowed, they've given advice, they've told people what they should do, but they've not given the restrictions. But most of Europe, Britain, France, Germany, most of the European countries have had these very top-heavy, top-down restrictions, government restrictions telling you what to do. And governments can't make these decisions for everybody. Everybody has different trade-offs, different benefits, different costs of these lockdowns, and the government just can't and doesn't take account of that. So for some people, yes, it's been very important to stay at home and to not go out and meet people and to keep safe because they're very vulnerable. Some of the elderly, some of the people with other health problems, yes, they've had to stay at home. They've had to face all these restrictions. But for a lot of other people, the cost-benefit analysis just doesn't work like this. For a lot of younger people, the risk of catching, or at least the virus, or at least the risk of getting seriously ill is very low. But the risk of health problems, of life problems, from being locked down can be much greater. And the cost of that, not just a financial cost, although there is that, but also the social cost, the developmental cost, the educational cost, all of these costs are much higher. So for a lot of people, for some people, the cost-benefit analysis of lockdown says, yes, of course you should shut yourselves away and protect yourselves. But for a lot of people, it's the other way. For a lot of people, the costs, the risks, the losses are a lot higher than the benefits. But because we're seeing government restrictions imposed from the top, one size fits all, rather than allowing people the choice, the liberty to make their own decisions and to make their own trade-offs, we're seeing that same decision having to be made for everyone. And that's imposing a huge financial but also social and developmental cost on society, which is going to grow. The costs of this, some of them are hidden, but are only going to come out over the next few years. So, yes, there are no absolutes, there are no answers in economics. There's no absolute right answer to what we can do. But what we can say is not whether the government's made the right answers, but has the government even asked the right questions? Have they even considered these trade-offs? No, they haven't. But by imposing this top-down view on everybody, they've imposed the same cost benefits on everyone, rather than allowing people to make their own cost-benefit choices and to make their own risks and reward calculations. And for a lot of people, yes, they would have done differently. We know that, because otherwise governments wouldn't have had to have restricted. They wouldn't have had to have brought in laws. They wouldn't have had to bring in authoritative restrictions on people and arrested people, because what we've seen is that a lot of people, when they've been given the chance, have met up. They have got together. They have socialised. They have had parties, legally or illegally. And that's not necessarily a wrong thing. It's not necessarily an irrational choice. For a lot of people, that's a sensible weighing up of the costs and benefits of the lockdowns. So what we'd like to see, rather than government top-down restrictions, is to the governments to treat people as sensible, as rational people, to allow their citizens to make decisions, to allow them, and to accept the fact that in a lot of cases these are going to be different the decisions that people make, some people, yes, they're going to decide one way, others are going to decide the other way, and a lot of the time that's a rational decision based on those people's circumstances. So rather than have these heavy centralised restrictions which are designed for everyone and don't actually fit anyone at all, let's open up, not necessarily let everything happen, but allow people to make decisions for themselves, allow them to make their own risk and reward calculations, allow them to decide what's best for them in their own circumstances, weighing the costs against the benefits, and treating people like grown-ups who can make decisions for themselves about how best to live their own lives.